12 men sit in a room with the doors bolted shut. The heavy wooden bar is dropped into place. You can hear them breathing in the dark, and executioners without blinking. Most people assume the story of the 12 ends quietly in the background of the New Testament. Think about the exact space you occupy right now. You might not be facing the rough iron of a Roman sword, in a foreign desert, but you are likely navigating a geography you never would have chosen for yourself. You are walking through the sterile, chemical-smelling air of a hospital corridor waiting for a diagnosis you cannot control. You are sitting in a quiet, empty house that feels far larger than it did a year ago, carrying a physical tightness in your jaw and your chest that refuses to let go. You are stuck in a career, a city, or a set of fractured relationships that feel like an absolute exile from the life you had carefully mapped out in your mind. When we find ourselves in these unwanted coordinates, our instinct is exactly the same as the disciples in that upper room. We want to drop the heavy wooden bar. We want to lock the door, preserve our remaining safety, and wait for the danger to pass. We tend to view these unexpected, painful locations as evidence that God has somehow abandoned the map. We view our isolation and our unwanted geography as a tragic detour from the real plan. Your scattering is not a random accident of circumstance. You read about Peter's sermons in Acts. You track the Apostle Paul across the Mediterranean, and the rest of the original disciples simply fade. It is the exact soil where your witness is required. The disciples did not choose the shores of India, the sun-baked plains of Ethiopia, or the brutal arenas of Rome because they were looking for exotic adventure. They were pushed out of their comfortable, familiar circles by the aggressive pressure of a hostile world, and they allowed that severe pressure to become a divine propulsion. If you are standing in a place you did not choose, facing a situation that feels like it is aggressively stripping away your security, you are standing in the precise apostolic tradition of the men who built the early church. The kingdom of heaven does not expand when we are safely barricaded in our own versions of Jerusalem. It expands when we are forced out into the unknown edges of our own lives. You are being asked to provide evidence of a resurrected king, not when the sun is shining, but when the shadows are longest and the cost is highest. That is what a true martyr does. And that requires a very specific kind of stubborn endurance. An endurance that brings us right back to the ancient dust, into stained glass windows. We think of them as static figures, holy men holding scrolls and looking pious in ancient church paintings. Because the empire was far from finished extracting its violent toll from the lesser-known names on that original roster, the empire does not stop with the famous names. The machine is hungry. It demands them all. Look at the men we barely remember, the background characters of the Gospels. These are the men who vanish entirely from the pages of the Book of Acts. You never read their theological letters. You never hear their profound sermons. We often treat them like quiet extras on a crowded movie set, but the ancient governors and the pagan priests do not treat them like extras. They treat them like a highly dangerous contagion. The violence accelerates. The geography expands. Philip preaches in the idle, heavy streets of Hierapolis. The crowds riot. The soldiers step in. The thick iron hooks tear through his ankles. He hangs upside down from a stone pillar. He bleeds into the Phrygian dust. Bartholomew hikes into the freezing altitudes of Armenia. The local priests are furious at their emptying temples. The punishment is agonizingly precise. The knives are razor sharp. They do not just kill him. They flay him. They peel the skin from his living muscles, while his lungs still pull the cold mountain air. An axe finally ends the unimaginable torment. Simon the Zealot pushes deep into Persia, but if you look closer at the historical records, the ancient traditions, and the raw geography of the first century, you find a reality that destroys that assumption. He is a man who once carried a concealed dagger to murder Roman soldiers. Now he carries absolutely nothing but the story of a crucified carpenter. The Persian authorities drag him into a public square. They pin him to a heavy log. A massive iron timber saw cuts his living body completely in half. Jude Thaddeus faces the same furious Persian mob. The arrows pierce his chest. The heavy wooden clubs shatter his skull. Matthias takes the cursed seat. He was the one chosen by lots, in a dusty upper room, to replace Judas Iscariot. He accepts the lethal promotion. He walks into the hostility of Syria. The mob surrounds him. The jagged stones crush his ribs in the dirt. The executioner's blade separates his head from his shoulders. Hooks, knives, saws, arrows, stones. The brutality is overwhelming. The terror is absolute. But the silence from these forgotten men is deafening. None of them recant under the blade. None of them point a shaking finger back toward Jerusalem and claim the empty tomb was a fabricated hoax. Not a single one of them trades the truth of what they saw for a few more years of oxygen. Their historical obscurity is not a sign of failure. It is the ultimate seal of their witness. They did not slowly fade away. They marched headfirst into the teeth of the Roman machine. And the question is, why? They did not need their names carved into marble basilicas. They only needed the name of the Nazarene planted in the foreign soil. They died in the dark so the message could walk into the light. The blood is spilled across the entire known world. The original inner circle is completely decimated. All but one. Every single man who stood on that mountain meets a violent, tearing end, except for the youngest brother. And the empire has a very different kind of torment waiting for him. History reveals that a terrified empire has two primary methods for dealing with an ideological threat. If they cannot publicly destroy the physical body, they will attempt to completely erase the voice. By the end of the 1st century, the Roman machine has successfully slaughtered every single member of the original inner circle, systematically crossing their names off a bloody imperial ledger. All except for one, John, the son of Zebedee, the youngest of the 12, becomes the sole survivor of the apostolic generation. He is forced to live through 6 decades of relentless grief, receiving the news year after year as, one by one, every man he shared that upper room with is violently executed in a completely foreign land. Why do 12 terrified fishermen, tax collectors, and political zealots suddenly leave the relative safety of their homes? And it is not for a lack of trying on the part of the emperor. Ancient historians like Tertullian record that during the reign of Domitian, the authorities drag the elderly John into the Colosseum in Rome. They plunge him into a massive cauldron of boiling oil. You can imagine the searing heat, the thick, suffocating smoke, the roaring crowd waiting for the final original witness to burn. But the execution fails. The old man emerges from the scalding vat completely unharmed, leaving the Roman executioners utterly bewildered and terrified. When an empire cannot kill a man, they bury him alive. Domitian banishes him to Patmos, a jagged, volcanic black rock jutting out of the Aegean Sea. It is a Roman penal colony, a barren wasteland of salt and stone where political prisoners are sent to break rocks until their bodies simply give out. The guards strip away his community, his influence, and his freedom, leaving him with nothing but the deafening, continuous crash of salt water against the cliffs. We tend to view his survival as a victory, a lucky escape from the blade that took his brothers. His exile is not a merciful reprieve. It is a calculated sensory deprivation. Rome wants the final witness to go quietly mad in the absolute silence of an isolated island, but they fundamentally misunderstand the nature of the man they are trying to break. Because in that desolate, rocky void, why do they walk thousands of miles in opposite directions, across deserts and oceans, knowing exactly what kind of violence is waiting for them, with the noise of the empire stripped completely away? The sky breaks violently open. The man who leaned on the chest of a carpenter in a crowded upper room is suddenly pulled into the throne room of the cosmos, receiving the apocalyptic vision of the Book of Revelation. He had to outlive them all. He had to endure the psychological weight of being the last man standing, simply so he could write down the final guarantee that the empire of Rome would eventually crumble, and the kingdom of the Lamb would hold the field. John dies an old man, breathing his last breath in the city of Ephesus, the only apostle to keep his blood in his own veins. He is the final living anchor to that Friday in Jerusalem. But when you finally step back from the ancient texts and look at the physical map of what he and his murdered brothers left behind, you see a pattern that permanently alters how you understand the Christian faith. The rock of the church was inverted on a Roman timber, and the empire that killed him eventually bowed to his king. The ultimate skeptic took an iron spear to the chest in India, and an entire subcontinent met a god they did not know. A fisherman hung asphyxiating on an X-shaped cross, and a hostile Greek city heard the gospel from his failing lungs. At the end of the road, most people think the ultimate proof of the Christian claim is the empty tomb itself. And it is the anchor. A tax collector bled out in the harsh Ethiopian dirt, and the first written account of the Messiah was sealed with his own life. A quiet follower was flayed alive in the freezing mountains of Armenia, and the ancient pagan altars were left completely empty. A replacement absorbed the crushing weight of Syrian stones and proved the bloody assignment was worth the staggering cost. The youngest brother was plunged into a desolate exile of volcanic rock, and the veil of the cosmos was torn completely open. One mandate, one witness, one unstoppable kingdom. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the heavy wooden bar in that very first upper room. 12 men sitting in the dark, smelling the leftover Passover lamb, jumping at the sound of every Roman boot on the limestone street outside. A nice theological idea does not make terrified men walk to the edge of the world to bleed. A hallucination does not survive the peeling of skin, the severing of a spine, or the swinging of an executioner's blade. Their scattering is not a fabricated myth. It is a blood-stained receipt. If you are in a season where you feel completely scattered, where your current geography feels like a painful exile, and you are desperate to just drop the wooden bar and survive, but there is a second proof. One written in bone and earth across 3 continents. Their deaths are not a tragic ending. They are a receipt. Look at the dirt of the 1st century. You are not drifting. You are deployed. The kingdom of heaven requires a witness, precisely, where the dark is the thickest, and the soil is the hardest. If this reached something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who feels isolated in a terrain they did not choose. Pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient texts. And may the God, who took a terrified room of hiding men and turned them into the foundation of the church, meet you in the quiet of your own locked room, and give you the absolute courage to walk out, to feel the weight of what these men actually did. You cannot start with the executioners, the swords, or the crosses. Outside, the limestone dust of Jerusalem is still settling from a Friday that broke their world in half. You have to start with a single, highly misunderstood Greek word that Jesus gives them right before he leaves. Acts chapter 1, verse 8. Jesus is standing with his disciples on the Mount of Olives. The wind blowing across the Kidron Valley, their feet planted on the coarse grid of a limestone pole. He is about to leave them. But before the sky takes him from their sight, he gives them a final mandate. He says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria, and to the end of the earth." The word our English Bibles translate as witnesses here is the Greek martyrs. In the 1st century, it is a strictly legal term. It appears 34 times in the New Testament, and in its purest, original, secular form. It simply describes someone who provides evidence. A martyrs is a person who stands in a Roman court of law, looks a judge in the eye, and testifies to something they have physically seen. But language is a living thing, shaped by the people who speak it. And over the next few decades, the actions of the men standing on that hillside will permanently alter its definition. By the time the early church is established, this Greek word, the smell of Passover lamb and dried blood, is still in the air. A massive circular stone has been rolled in front of a tomb, evolves into the English word we now know as martyr. That linguistic evolution changes everything about how you read the history of the early church. When Jesus looks at this ragged group of followers and assigns them this title, he is not offering a church growth strategy. He is not handing them a public speaking assignment to politely share their religious philosophies in the town square. A witness is not a title of religious prestige. It is a prophecy of physical cost. They are standing on a mountain looking at a man, who has conquered a tomb. And they are being told that the price of telling the world about that conquest will be their own flesh. They do not have to wonder if the authorities will respond with violence, because the splintered wood of Golgotha is still burning in their recent memory. Yet, they do not run. They leave the mountain. They pack their few belongings. And they begin walking out into an empire that is actively sharpening its swords. And the first man to discover exactly what that Greek word requires of his body does not even make it out of the city gates. Jerusalem bakes under the Judean sun. The year is roughly 44 AD. King Herod Agrippa needs political capital. He needs a spectacle to appease the local elites. He arrests James, the son of Zebedee, one of the inner circle, the man who once brazenly asked to sit at the right hand of glory, and with it, every hope they had of an earthly kingdom. They are hiding. They are terrified of the rough wood of a Roman cross, in a kingdom he did not yet understand. Now, the kingdom is here, and the throne is an execution block. There is no long trial. There is no drawn-out theological debate. Herod gives the order. The cold steel is drawn. The heavy blade swings. James falls. The first apostolic blood hits the limestone dust. The empire assumes the terror will work. Cut off the leaders. Scatter the flock. Silence the witnesses. But the scattering only spreads the fire. The movement does not fracture. It accelerates. Fast forward 20 years. The geography shifts from the edge of the Mediterranean to the center of the world. Rome. The sky is choked with ash. The Emperor Nero is watching his city burn. He desperately needs a scapegoat. He points his finger at the followers of the Nazarene. Peter is dragged into the circus of Nero, the fisherman from Galilee, the man who once warmed his hands by a charcoal fire and swore he never knew Jesus to save his own skin. He is an old man now. His hands are calloused. His hair is white. He stands before the absolute peak of Roman military terror. He is sentenced to the cross. The executioners drop the heavy timber into the dirt. They gather the crude iron spikes. The crowd screams for the spectacle, but Peter looks at the wood. He makes a staggering demand. He refuses to die in the same posture as his Lord. They jump at the sound of boots on the cobblestone street. Fast forward just a few decades, and the pattern shifts violently. The soldiers mock him, but they comply. They flip the rough timber. They drive the iron through his feet at the top. They shatter his wrists at the bottom. They hoist the heavy cross backward. The blood rushes into his head. The Roman sky hangs inverted below his feet. The sand of the arena presses against his fading vision. His lungs fight gravity for every excruciating breath. The upside-down cross is not a symbol of Roman creativity. It is a monument of apostolic humility. Peter dies in the dirt, anchored to the city that will eventually build grand basilicas in his name. The rock of the church is broken against the bedrock of the empire. Two men of the inner circle. Two violent. Public ends. Rome feels triumphant. But the empire is only looking at its own backyard, while Peter takes his final, agonizing breath in the capital of the civilized world. Another man is walking straight past the borders of the known map. History has a habit of taking a person's lowest moment, freezing it in amber, and making it their permanent identity. We are a culture that loves to flatten complex lives into two-dimensional caricatures. For 2,000 years, Western theology has branded one specific man with a title of skepticism, Doubting Thomas. We dissect his hesitation in that locked room. Look at the ancient map. Same men, same brutal empire, but the locked doors are completely gone. We critique his demand to physically press his fingers into the ruptured flesh of a resurrected rabbi. We use his name in modern sermons as a cautionary tale against a lack of faith, treating his demand for proof as a tragic flaw. But the historical footprint of Thomas completely subverts that comfortable narrative. His demand for physical evidence was not a sign of spiritual weakness. It was the prerequisite for an impossible journey, because once his fingers traced the jagged edges of a Roman spear wound, the skepticism permanently evaporated, replaced by an ironclad conviction that drove him further than the paved boundaries of the empire even allowed. while Peter and Paul navigated the familiar trade routes of the Mediterranean basin. Thomas walked eastward. He crossed the arid, blinding expanses of the Syrian desert. He boarded merchant vessels, navigating the unpredictable swells of the Arabian Sea, eventually stepping onto the humid, spice-heavy shores of the Malabar coast in southern India in the year 52 AD. So Thomas pushes into the dense interior of the Indian subcontinent. He spends 2 decades establishing vibrant communities, defying the rigid local caste systems, and pulling thousands of outcasts into an entirely new kingdom reality. The man who once demanded absolute proof became the absolute proof for an entire civilization that had never heard the name of Yahweh. And the ancient texts, specifically the Acts of Thomas, tell us exactly how this massive disruption, one, is bleeding out from a spear wound on a sandy beach in India. Another is hanging from an X-shaped cross in a Greek coastal town, was finally stopped. On a rocky prominence known today as St. Thomas Mount, near modern Chennai, the local religious authorities decide they can no longer tolerate his growing influence. 4 soldiers corner him as he prays. A heavy iron spear is thrust through his chest, pinning the ultimate skeptic to the red dirt of a foreign continent. The hands that once demanded to touch the wounds of God finally receive wounds of their own. Thomas bleeds out at the very edge of the known world, completely alone, having carried the message further than anyone else dared to go. But for the brothers who stayed closer to the shadow of Rome, the imperial cruelty was about to get far more creative. The winds whip off the Ionian Sea. The Greek city of Patras is hostile. Andrew is arrested. The brother of Peter is dragged to the execution site. The Roman governor demands his absolute silence. The governor threatens him with crucifixion. Andrew refuses to bend. The soldiers do not use iron spikes. They use thick, coarse hemp ropes. They bind his wrists and his ankles to a crux de cassata, an X-shaped cross. They hoist him into the Mediterranean sun. The salt air stings his skin. The heavy rope cuts deep into his circulation. It is a calculated cruelty. Nailing kills a man in hours. Tying kills a man in days. The asphyxiation is agonizingly slow, but Andrew does not scream, preaching to the crowd as his lungs slowly fail. Another is kneeling before an executioner's sword in the exact city where they are currently hiding. He hangs in the blazing heat for 2 full days. He watches the crowds gather at the base of his timber. He preaches to the soldiers. He preaches to the merchants. He preaches until his throat goes completely dry. The execution is not a silencer. It is a pulpit. He breathes his last breath, still commanding the Greek crowd to turn to the risen king. Thousands of miles to the south, another execution is underway. The air is thick. The Ethiopian sun beats down. Matthew is cornered. The former tax collector, the man who once sat behind a booth smelling of cold Roman coins and bureaucratic ink, he used to extort his own people. He used to hide behind the protection of the Roman garrison. He traded a life of lucrative safety for a life of relentless wandering. Now, he has run out of road. The king of Ethiopia is enraged by his teaching. A swordsman is sent to collect a different kind of tax. A heavy blade is drawn. The halberd flashes in the blinding light. It strikes him in the back. The man who wrote the first gospel falls into the foreign dust. His blood stains the soil of Africa. The old Matthew would have bargained for his life. He would have offered bribes. He would have run. The new Matthew bleeds out in total silence. The transformation is absolute. Same men. But the terror has evaporated. The men who fled from a servant girl in a midnight courtyard are now staring down emperors. These are the same men who bickered about who would be the greatest in the kingdom. The same men who fell asleep in the Garden of Gethsemane. The same men who fled when the temple guards arrived with torches. Now, they are standing their ground in places they cannot even pronounce. They are falling one by one. The fishermen, the tax collectors, the political zealots. Their bodies are scattered across completely different continents, planted in soils they never imagined they would see. And that exact geography of their scattering holds an uncomfortable mirror up to the modern believer. We look at the blood-stained map of the first century, at the absolute geographic chaos of where these men ended up. And it is easy to keep their stories safely locked in the past. We treat their wandering as a historical anomaly, a specific apostolic calling that has absolutely nothing to do with our modern, insulated reality. You sit under the harsh hum of fluorescent office lights, or you stare at the cold glass of a smartphone screen, in the middle of a restless night, and their ancient grit feels completely disconnected from your current season. But the core mechanism of their scattering has not changed, even if the terrain looks entirely different.